Hi everyone, my name's Talia Borum and I'm a proud Bundjalung woman from Tenterfield, New South Wales. Today we're going to learn about First Peoples employment. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land in which we meet today, and I'd like to pay my respect to both elders past and present and extend that respect to any emerging leaders with us today. Diversity and inclusion in the workplace is important. We need to understand the experiences of First Peoples in the workplace, which will allow us to close the gap. By the end of this topic, you should be able to understand the key priorities of government in closing the gap report 2020 and initiatives to building capacity in employment and business, and to identify the strategies and plans that support First Peoples employment. Closing the gap is a national agreement between governments to recognise the need to achieve better life outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. It is underpinned by the belief that First Peoples must determine, drive and own the desired outcome. There were specific targets set including education, healthcare and employment. Since it was implemented in 2008, disadvantage has not been lessened, although there has been some progression, particularly in education. Employment is one aspect of inequality and disadvantage that Australian First Peoples live with. As you can see, that in 2018, the target was to halve the gap between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. This has not been met. Within the workplace, First Peoples are most likely to feel discriminated against than non-Indigenous Australians. There is almost a 26% gap in employment, with Indigenous employment at 49%, whilst non-Indigenous employment is at 75%. Reconciliation Australia asserted that governments' failure to base their policies on meaningful consultation with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities is a core reason why the strategy failed to significantly improve outcomes. It is vital that Indigenous people are consulted with and empowered to make decisions for their own communities. We do see organisations developing and implementing strategies to enhance employment opportunities. For example, the Growing Our Own program. Across Australia, only 1% of teachers identify as First Peoples. The Northern Territory Catholic Education and Charles Darwin University have developed a long-term project to develop a quality, local Indigenous teachers workforce specifically to support Indigenous assistant teachers to become teachers. This project reflects the belief that education is the single greatest tool for improving Indigenous health and well-being. Yet in remote Australian communities, Indigenous students' literacy and school retention rates remain alarmingly low. Indigenous educational outcomes can only be improved through teaching methods that respect cultural and language barriers. The lack of Indigenous role models is a major barrier to student success. So far, the project has trained 54 teachers, with 90% working as teachers. Where people live to affect their engagement in work and study, 40% of First Peoples are engaged in working in cities compared to 29% in rural and remote areas. Working in remote communities can be hard to find. However, tourism can be an avenue for employment opportunities. In conclusion, steps have been taken to tackle discrimination of First Peoples and to close the gap. However, these significant issues still remain. There is a growing recognition of their need to develop inclusive recruitment practices and employment initiatives with regards to First Peoples. These are the references for today. Thank you for listening.